Okay, Mr. G, global history. We're going to have a focus for the tonight. For the evening, the focus is going to be where and why did written language develop? Now, along with that focus comes some essential questions. For instance, what caused the first language to be developed? And how did the basic aspects of that language change over time? If you can answer these essential questions, then I'll feel like you really understand the focus. So why don't you do me and yourself a favor, pause the video, and record in your notebook the focus and record the two essential questions. I'll wait here till you're done. Alright, so here's what I'm going to want to see from you tomorrow. I'm going to want to see in your notebook the date, along with the focus and the essential questions that you just copied. I'm going to want to see a completed version of the note template. You'll see that on the next screen. And a T-chart showing two causes for and two effects of written language. Finally, I'm going to want you to answer each of the essential questions in your own words in your notebook using complete sentences only. Now here's what the note take template is going to look like. This is essentially what I'm going to want to see in your book tomorrow. Roman numerals, just like the Harvard format we talked about, right? Roman numerals, a surplus of food. I'm going to want to see you record what caused it and you record what it led to and give me an example of that. Roman numeral 2 is the trade in Mesopotamia. Good reasons because what and what problems arose because of the trading. And then about cuneiform, which is the actual name of the language you're about to learn about, right? Where was it developed? Why was it developed? What type of writing was it when it started? What did it change to over time? I'm going to want to see the answers in your book for that. And then two causes and two effects of written language in general, but of cuneiform in particular. You can, if you want, and I strongly suggest you do, pause the video now and write down this note template in your notebook so that you have it in front of you as you watch the rest of the video. Won't you pause the video now? Okay, so let's begin. To remind you, we're talking about this whole unit, the Neolithic Revolution, right? And the best thing I think about the Neolithic Revolution, just to remind you, better farming and better ways of raising animals for food, what we call, right, what we call the domestication of plants and animals. Right, the greatest thing about the Neolithic Revolution is that it led to a surplus of food for human beings. Now, that surplus of food by itself led to something really astounding. Really astounding, which is called trade, right? When you have more than what you need, you're going to trade the stuff. You're going to trade some of that stuff for things that you want, right? And so, what did people trade? Well, if you grew wheat, that's a picture of a bushel of wheat. If you grew wheat, then you traded the extra wheat that you had, right? And if you raised cattle, then you would trade some extra cattle that you have. And if you were able to ground that wheat into flour, right? We grow wheat, it gets ground into flour, and then people use the flour to actually make bread, which is about 97% of most people's diet. Then you would trade the flour, right? The basic premise is you have more than what you need with the surplus, so therefore you trade it for things that you want. The best part about the Industrial Revolution. And here are some trading routes from the general area during more or less this period of time. This isn't just Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is this tiny sliver of land on this map right over here, right there. There we go. And we'll take a close-up look at that on the next screen. But, this map shows trading routes, which are what these red lines are, moving all the way into India. That's the Indus River there. And all the way past the peninsula, the Saudi Arabia peninsula, to the west. Right. So these are large trading routes. Trade was a very big thing after you had the surplus of food. And here's a close-up of Mesopotamia itself. In it, between Akkad, which are known for the Akkadians, and Sumer, which are known for the Sumerians, between those two blue lines, that's the Tigris and the Euphrates River, Tigris-Euphrates rivers, lied all of these cities, right? And these were the famous Mesopotamian cities, right? Here's the city of Ur in the bottom, and Eridu, and if you take a look at Lagash on the top, there's Kish up top. So what exactly led to, how does any of this have to do with written language? Well, let's take a look at this from a trader's perspective, right? Let's say you lived in the city of Ur and you traded wheat and you had some extra wheat to trade with this guy up here in the city of Lagash. Well, chances are you weren't going to stop your life to actually personally drive your stuff up to Lagash to trade it. You had to hire someone to do it. A transportation person, for instance. You'd pay this person a fee in order to move up to Lagash to trade your goods for you. Well, what happens if you sent 10 bushels of wheat up, but only 2 bushels arrived? And the person in Lagash who wanted to trade some maybe some different type of wheat or maybe some cattle, that person sent down a certain amount, but only half of that arrived. There'd really be no way for you to confirm how much you had initially sent. As a consequence, people are surprised and ultimately disappointed that the trade that they thought they were ensuing didn't actually work out that way. You weren't getting what you thought you were going to get from your trade. So here's the problem, right? As trade increased, farmers needed a way to make sure that all of the goods they traded arrived at their destination with no, using this word corruption, I probably shouldn't have used it. I should use the word confusion instead, right? Because when things aren't that efficient, people get confused quite often. So there's the problem. So let's say there's a solution. Let's say that you start thinking, how can I communicate directly with this guy up in Lagash without having to depend on the traders to actually carry the messages for me? How can I actually hold records so that I can keep track of how many bushels of wheat I'm trading to begin with? How can I do these things? So eventually what people started to do was the common sense thing, right? They started to write down symbols on whatever they had around. And Mesopotamia happened to have a lot of this stuff. This is clay, right? And they would write the symbols of precisely what they were trading, and they would heat those symbols up in the clay to make sure that they stuck, right? Pardon me. So here's a symbol of what a donkey might look like at the beginning of this language, cuneiform, right? Underneath this is a symbol of an ox. You just see the V represents the 2 horns, and that represents the head. Here's a sun. Here's a grain, a piece of grain. A bushel of wheat would be several of these, right? And you would write these down on a clay tablet. You then, maybe you'd go to the person you were hiring to be traded and to do trading on your behalf and say, hey, listen, make sure that this clay tablet gets up to my trading partner unharmed and untouched, because I want to know exactly how much of this stuff gets up to this other city where I'm trading with. Otherwise, I'm not going to pay your money. Now, at this point, each of the trading partners are happy. The guy up there and you down there are both very, very happy with the outcome of the trade because it's more efficient, right? So, solution. Written language allowed farmers to communicate directly across great distances, and this allowed trade to grow. That's really just one example of how a written language helped people out, right? The real basic is everyone else could communicate as well, as long as they learn how to write the language too, and as long as they learn how to read the language as well. And what language was that? Well, the name of the language we're talking about is cuneiform. It's the first ever written language in the Western world. It was developed in Mesopotamia over a very long period of time. We're talking about thousands and thousands of years of language development. And it was based on symbols, at first at least, and these symbols were known as glyphs. That word may look familiar, glyphs, such as hieroglyphs or hieroglyphic language. That's the famous Egyptian language. Actually, it's not the first glyph language. The first glyph language didn't come from Egypt. It came from Mesopotamia, and it was called this, cuneiform. Very, very important language to know, and I don't know why my computer's going crazy. Very important language to know, and very important language to understand. Okay, so here's what it was when it began. And if you could check out this chart right there, you could see that at the beginning, a donkey's head may look exactly like this, exactly like a donkey's head. But later on in time, that changed to this, which later changed to this. This was the actual symbol for donkey many years later, to this, which actually looks nothing like a donkey. Oxen would change from this to this to this, well, to this, which looked nothing like what it looked like in the beginning. In fact, all of these symbols and all of these glyphs changed pretty tremendously, actually, from when it started to when it was over with. Here is some examples of what cuneiform words looked like at the beginning, right around 3200 BCE. Remember, before the Common Era, pardon me. Right? And it was a head at the beginning. Maybe 200 years later, the head was in a different orientation, but it was still a head. 600 years later, it didn't look much like a head. These were different symbols that the people saw. And then later on, right about 1000 BC, you start to see a very drastic change. Check out the hand in 3200 BC versus the hand by the time it got to 1000 BC. If you take a close look at this entire column there, you can see that by 1000 BCE, by 1000 before the Christian era, before that time where Jesus Christ was apparently born, it became year zero, right? By 1000 BCE, these weren't glyphs anymore. This was something very, very different. And in fact, by 1000 BCE, we started to see something that looks a little more like an alphabet and a little less like glyphs, right? An alphabet is when you have different symbols that represent a letter. Those letters can combine to words, and the words can combine to, well, you know the rest from there, right? Well, by about 1000 BCE, these glyphs looked more like this. The glyphs wouldn't represent a thing like a head. The glyphs would represent a symbol, a letter like an A. Here's a letter A. There's the letter B by 1000 BCE. You see the letter J is very crazy to write, as is the letter K. And it probably would take you years to learn the letter T, but maybe an hour and a half or so to learn the letter U. Right? And each of these symbols didn't represent things now. Now, by 1000 BCE, right, by about 2200 years after the language was developed, these things represented actual letters. And this is the cuneiform alphabet that we know at 1000 BCE. It's what you're going to use in class tomorrow, right? These are what the letters are. They're fairly easy to write and fairly simple language to learn when it looks like this. And these are what the numbers were, right? It goes all the way up to 1 to 9, and then there'd be a special symbol for 10, which you would add a digit to, just like we do, right? For 20, 30, 40, and 50, going all the way up, right? But this is what cuneiform developed into after several thousand years. Okay, so here's a note-taking template, right? And now's a good time to, well, maybe not now, but in a moment after the rest of your screen comes up, now's a good time to pause the video and to complete this note-taking template so it's totally done. All of these answers are pretty much directly in there, and just about all of these answers are in there. The only thing I think you may have to think about is the second example of an effect. You can see the two causes at the beginning. I gave you one effect, and you're probably going to have to use the best critical thinking skills that you can to think of another effect, right? Now, how about the questions? Remember, the questions are at least 3 sentences per question, and please write in complete sentences, otherwise I can't give you the credit for the homework, right? Okay, so 1, what caused the first written language to be developed? What were the causes of it? Write it in complete sentences. You can write 3 of them, 1 topic sentence and 2 supporting sentences, and answer that perfectly. And then second, how did the basic aspects of that language change over time? Well, you can think about what was the name of the language, right? What did it resemble at first? And then after a few thousand years, what did the language resemble then? Okay, so now's a good time to pause the video. You can write this all down in your book and take some time to answer them. And remember, if you need to answer them, just scan back in the video and look from there. Okay, see you in class tomorrow. Take care.